solutions, and the Fix Our Forest Act is a pivotal step toward making America's wooded areas healthier, more abundant, and resilient. It's also no secret that the health of our forest isn't nearly what it can be and should be. Catastrophic wildfires used to be once-in-a-generation events. Now wildfire seasons have become wildfire years. And sadly, large wildfires have become so commonplace that millions of acres have to burn in the West before national news even gives the story a passing glance. Just as wildfire crosses boundaries and cross lines that define land ownership, it also crosses political divisions without regard to whether the impacted area is red or blue. Many of us represent districts that have been devastated by these raging infernos, with lives, livelihoods, and habitats eradicated by fire in just a matter of minutes. I'm proud that the Fix Our Forest Act is bipartisan legislation. Congressman Scott Peters, our colleague from California, and an environmental lawyer by trade, and I have extended our bipartisan cooperation to the Fix Our Forest Act. The legislation gives land managers the tools they need now to implement immediate change and prevent cataclysmic damage to the forest communities out west and across the country. Today, I'm offering every member in this room a chance to join us on this bipartisan common sense bill that mitigates catastrophic wildfires, revitalizes private markets, and gives communities essential tools to manage the resources they know best. Its enactment will result in healthier forests and a healthier environment. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. Last year alone, a record amount of rainfall out west cut back on the severity of wildfires, but it also spurred new growth of brush and grasses throughout public and private lands. And as we head into the drier summer months, swift action is essential to prevent these new fine fuels from turning into a potential powder keg with the slightest spark capable of triggering a monumental explosion. And unfortunately, we're already seeing record fires in the West, and we're only getting towards the end of June. New fires popping up in several states. But fortunately, we do not have to sit on our hands and hope for the best. The bipartisan legislation provides real solutions that land managers can implement immediately upon enactment. I'm asking members on both sides of the aisle to come to the table and work with us on sound solutions that we know can and will protect communities from catastrophic wildfires and will save lives. And it will protect property and infrastructure, and there's no reason that we should have to watch what continually happens over and over every year when we know there's a way to do better. I look forward to the debate today on the Fix Our Forest Act. I yield back my time and recognize the ranking member, Mr. Huffman, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. 77 million Americans across the nation this week faced emergency extreme heat alerts in their communities. We've seen record daily temperatures from coast to coast, and this scorching heat dome is a very real threat to people's lives. Hundreds of lives have already been lost, and it represents another desperate warning sign that this nation remains unprepared for the devastating costs of our changing climate. Instead of facing that reality, unfortunately, our friends across the aisle continue to promote a drill, baby drill energy policy and otherwise ignore the climate crisis facing our planet. We still have heard nothing but silence from Republican members of this committee in response to a shocking revelation from the FTC that big oil has been colluding with OPEC to illegally raise gas prices. That's something we ought to be interested in. I'm talking about smoking gun evidence of big oil using our public lands, often with impunity, and price gouging the American people for profit. Over a month ago, committee Democrats requested an investigation into this wrongdoing to protect American consumers. We've had no response. And there seems to be no interest either in investing in the affordable energy of the future. Instead, our colleagues across the aisle continue to support free rein for global polluters to drill practically everywhere and increase emissions all over the world, all while illegally price gouging American consumers. And so our summers will continue to grow hotter and hotter while big oil gets richer and richer. These extreme temperatures do, of course, increase the urgency of common sense forest management. However, I am very disappointed that our Republican colleagues failed to work with us on the bill that is before the committee today. Committee Democrats urged a bipartisan path forward on these issues multiple times, hoping to reach a compromise that could move unanimously, actually be signed into law. Over a month ago, Democratic staff provided a detailed red line of the bill text, and we didn't get any response. We have had some high-level conversations, and I appreciate that, but there's been no engagement on actual text, and instead, Republicans moved ahead with introducing the bill and even scheduling a markup, all without any meaningful attempt at a bipartisan agreement that can pass the House on suspension. I think we could have had that had the effort been made. The bill in front of the committee today is a wasted opportunity. It'll do nothing to stop the threat of dangerous heat waves engulfing the country and the globe, and in several respects, it contains wrong-headed and misguided policies. We should be working on real solutions to our forestry challenges. We should be working to address the climate crisis. We should be investigating the egregious fraud perpetrated by big oil and OPEC on American families. This committee can and must do better. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 8790, Fix Our Forest Act. Ask unanimous consent that the Subcommittee on Federal Lands be discharged from further consideration of the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to an amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purpose of debate on the bill? Yeah, I'll head on over.
Okay, what should we do?
Does any member wish to be recognized for purposes of debate on the bill?
I do.
I recognize the ranking member from Nevada.
Thank you.
There you go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, this is an important debate that we're having about what's in this bill. Congress should certainly be debating what we can do to better manage our forests and contain wildfires and smoke that folks in my district, despite living in the middle of the Mojave Desert, like yourself, have sadly come to know all too well. But I actually want to use my time to talk about what's not in this bill, the issue that we should be addressing first and foremost, and that's an honest and livable wage for people who actually do the work. Our federal firefighters, many of whom are sitting in the audience, are proud to put their lives on the line to save entire communities, but they're staring down the barrel of a 50% pay cut at the end of this fiscal year. And that's on top of the underwhelming and frankly unforgivable thank you for your service they're already getting. Moldy sandwiches, rat-infested barracks, and virtually no mental health support for the PTSD that's often as deadly as the fires they're fighting. And for anyone here who doesn't believe me, I came with receipts. Let me read a brief testimonial, actually from my nephew who serves as a federal firefighter up in Oregon. He's in the Missoula Smoke Jumper Base. This is what he said. 2 years ago, a good friend of mine who'd worked for me for 2 seasons died in his boots after being hit by a tree on a fire in Oregon. Colin was a GS4 making $16 an hour without any money for his family. We have to fundraise for that, and probably without government health insurance. Not much has changed since then, apart from the temporary stipend we keep renewing and the more experienced WFFs that leave to find livable wages and less demanding job. The move the more dangerous the job is for young folks still on the line who lose that experience in their leadership, not to mention for the American homeowners whose houses burn because we failed to invest in our emergency responders. I have another testimonial. I remember being told by an instructor of our entry-level fire class that, quote, "You will end up with at least one debilitating injury and at least a few dead friends if you stay in this profession. So far, at the age of 33, I have a hole in my retina, a couple bulging discs, messed up knees, and injured shoulders, and multiple friends that have died on the line or have been lost to suicide. If you ask most wildland firefighters that have been in for 10 years or more, they will tell you the same thing. This career is rough on the body, and you just hope you make it to retirement in good enough shape to collect on it because the government won't step in to help you." Right now, the government's us in this room. This committee and the House cannot continue to refuse to do what is right by these brave men and women who, despite the injuries, the pain, the loss, and the neglect, keep going back to hold the line because they're the only thing that stands between a wildfire and somebody's home or business. My colleague, Representative Joe Neguse, has a bipartisan bill, the Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act, which we could be marking up right now, that already has the support of dozens of Republicans and Democrats, myself included. I know you all know what the bill is because these firefighters have been on the Hill for months this week, even begging members of Congress to pass it. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad we're having a conversation about the important work we need to do to fix our forests, but let's not forget who does the work, and let's stop and think before we ask more of them for nothing in return. Thank you, and I yield.
Yeah, thank you to the ranking member for her comments. Does any other member wish to be recognized? I'd like to share an opening statement here, and I recognize myself for that statement. I speak in support of H.R. 8790, the Fix Our Forests Act. This bipartisan comprehensive legislation will encourage active forest management and support community resiliency to wildfires. It will expedite environmental analyses, reduce frivolous lawsuits, and increase the pace and scale of forest restoration projects in high-priority firesheds. H.R. 8790 will prioritize our most at-risk areas, protecting local and tribal communities, making watersheds and municipal water supplies more resilient, and preventing stand-converting catastrophic wildfires. The bill encourages greater transparency among federal agencies by requiring more accurate accounting of hazardous fuels reduction treatments. It also promotes the adoption of new and innovative technologies, such as AI and drones, to monitor wildfires. Crucially, the Fix Our Forests Act strengthens existing collaborative tools such as the Good Neighbor Authority and stewardship contracting so that non-federal partners can help federal land managers complete essential cross-boundary work. The bill empowers states, tribes, local governments, and private stakeholders to make federal lands healthier and more resilient. The legislation is the culmination of months of bipartisan negotiations and input from members on both sides of the aisle on shared priorities. It incorporates feedback from agencies and stakeholders representing diverse forestry, recreation, and environmental interests. This broad coalition has come together for a simple reason. We don't have time to waste in addressing our forest health and wildfire crisis. Wildfires burn an average of 7 million acres annually. The 3 worst wildfires on record all occurred in the last decade, each burning over 10 million acres. It seems like every year we pass a new ominous benchmark. From Paradise, California to Boulder, Colorado to Lahaina, Hawaii, catastrophic wildfires are becoming more common and more destructive. The Fix Our Forests Act is an opportunity for Congress to act and take a stand that catastrophic wildfires will not become the norm. With this legislation, we can turn the tide against catastrophic wildfires. Whether it's federal forests or state, tribal, or private lands, there are now 1 billion acres across the country at significant risk of wildfire. That's a billion with a B. So it will take all of our land managers working together to address our overstocked, unhealthy, and fire-prone forests. This legislation gives federal land managers critical tools that they need that could be implemented immediately after this bill passes. That's important. For too long, we've thrown money at the agencies and watched as work on the ground remains stagnant. We can't let that status quo continue. We have to address the actual barriers that are preventing this work: bulletproofing NEPA documents, endless reconsultations, and frivolous litigation. I want to once again thank the many members of this committee who championed legislation that is now included in the Fix Our Forests Act. I want to especially thank Representative Peters for his leadership and bipartisanship. I urge my colleagues to support the Fix Our Forests Act, and I yield back the balance of my time. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, it is now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 8790. And I recognize myself for the purpose of offering my amendment in the nature of a substitute, designated Tiffany A.N.S. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I'll be real brief in regards to this amendment. I'm here to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8790. And I urge my colleagues to support this ANS of the underlying legislation. It is a culmination of the House Committee on Natural Resources efforts this Congress to advance thoughtful solutions to increase this pace and scale of forest management. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, it is now in order to consider amendments to the ANS. I recognize Mr. Fulcher for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Westerman number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak in support of Westerman number 1. This amendment makes technical corrections to the bill, clarifies key provisions related to litigation reform and the purposes of the newly established Fireshed Center, which the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission originally proposed. In total, the Fix Our Forest Act contains more than a dozen provisions directly recommended by this nonpartisan commission. This amendment also includes refinements to the common sense litigation reform proposal in section 121. These changes were made following consultation with the appropriate legislative council attorneys with expertise in that space. And finally, this amendment includes a provision to encourage the Forest Service to prioritize revising forest plans that are out of date. So this new section also directs the Forest Service to make plans and plan amendments available online. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I thank my colleagues for their willingness to engage with the legislation, urge them to support the Westerman Manager's Amendment and the underlying bill. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to thank the gentleman for his amendment. Is there further discussion on the amendment designated Westerman number 1? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the chair designated Westerman number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. What's that? This voter is on her way, and when she gets here, we'll recognize her. I recognize the gentlewoman from Nevada for the purposes of offering an amendment designated Ledger Fernandez number 5. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Congresswoman Leisure Fernandez for offering this amendment. We have talked about how there are provisions of this underlying bill that the minority can support. However, we still disagree on another significant issue. We have said time and again, our federal land management agencies are underfunded and understaffed. The Forest Service has made it very clear to us that they are facing significant funding gaps as operating costs and federal salary requirements increase. These gaps and the lack of agency capacity are the main sources of delays in implementing active forest management projects, the exact delays that this bill is supposed to address. So it would make sense that this 70-page forestry package, which authorizes a plethora of new programs, would also include funding authorizations. However, it does not. In addition, much of the work that is being authorized through this bill is the work that the Forest Service is already undertaking with investments, real investments with real dollars that we made through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act over strong Republican opposition. These investments have begun paying off in a big way. The Forest Service launched a 10-year wildlife crisis strategy and has been able to treat a record number of acres thanks to the extra support that we have provided. The Forest Service has also invested in 171 wood innovation project proposals across 41 states just this year. However, the bill before us today would ask the Forest Service to take fire sheds that they have already designated and redesignate them, conduct assessments on them, and implement large forest management projects throughout, all without a single new dollar attached. It also creates new research programs, interagency coordinating groups, and grant programs. Building out our capabilities to detect and respond to more extreme wildfires, supporting communities as they adapt to the growing threat through planning and home hardening, and identifying new and innovative ways to use wood products are all incredibly important initiatives that we as a committee need to work together on. However, these activities cannot be done without an actual financial investment from the federal government. This amendment addresses this glaring omission. I urge the adoption of this amendment, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on this amendment?
Mr. Chair.
I'd like to recognize the gentle lady from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member, for reading the importance about this amendment. Just last week, new wildfires potentially sparked by an arsonist ravaged the Mescalero Apache Reservation in the town of Ruidoso. At least 2 are dead. As we sit here now, firefighters are working to contain those blazes. The communities in my district destroyed by the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires are still rebuilding 2 years later. We can't afford to lose communities year after year to wildfires. We must pass legislation to address this growing threat. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the work that has gone into this bill that would help us better track, manage, and reduce wildfires. I support the biochar development, the creation of a fireshed center, and many other provisions. I want to thank the committee for changes that have been made to improve this bill. Thank you for listening to tribes and including a new requirement for shared stewardship agreements. But, Mr. Chair, over the weekend, I met with the Vice President of the Mescalero Apache tribe and discussed the deadly wildfires that burnt their lands and the homes in Ruidoso. I know this committee appreciates the way the Mescalero Apache have managed their forest. You've used big posters of their land in this committee room to highlight what good management looks like. Indeed, the Vice President explained that when the wildfires hit these areas of thinning and prescribed burns, the fire slowed, moved lower to the ground, and was more easily fought. That's exactly what we want to have happen. However, the Vice President also pointed out that they do not receive enough federal resources to manage the hundreds of thousands of acres on their lands. That's a big problem with this bill. It doesn't contain the authorization for the funding to fix our forests. Neither the Mescalero Apache tribe nor the Forest Service can do the work needed to fix our forests without funding. We must include authorization for spending in this bill. The Vice President also walked me through their work on the endangered spotted owl. Mescalero is collecting data and observing that the owl is actually migrating into areas of the forest that they have been treated. They'll use this information to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service on adjustments to their management plan, rather than ignoring that endangered species exist in their forests. So the Mescalero experience teaches us that we can account for endangered species and continually update plans to account for those changes. The bill is fatally flawed when it would ignore any endangered species listings for updated management plans. The final comment I want to make is how important it is that we have community input. This bill strips away community input when it increases categorical exclusions. The Forest Service is still rebuilding trust in northern New Mexico after its prescribed burns set off the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires. There are going to be more prescribed burns that need to happen. But if we don't have community input into future thins and future burns, we are going to eliminate the ability to build that trust. It's only with community input that you build trust. So it's with these lessons learned from the devastating fires in New Mexico of the past 2 years that I offer my amendment to authorize the funds the Forest Service needs to carry out the important work directed by this bill. We know that unstable budgets and a lack of resources are what actually prevent the Forest Service from achieving its forest management plans. It's not because of community input, and it's not because of endangered species. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of my amendment that will make sure the Forest Service has the resources it needs to keep our communities safe. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, I'd like to recognize myself. I oppose this amendment, which would authorize $686 million in spending that is not offset. This amendment violates House protocols, meaning this bill could not move to the floor. We mustn't do anything to delay this vital piece of legislation from advancing through the legislative process. The Forest Service already receives billions of dollars in federal funds that is unable to properly utilize due to bureaucratic red tape and frivolous lawsuits. While the number of communities at high risk of being burned by wildfire continues to increase, the agency has proposed reducing the number of acres they will treat for the second year in a row. The Fix Our Forests Act gets at the root cause of what prevents work from happening on the ground by giving the Forest Service the necessary tools to get to work immediately. When Chief Moore appeared before the Subcommittee on Federal Lands earlier this month, he stated that the agency had missed its internal timber targets because of litigation, not funding. I appreciate the gentlelady from New Mexico's previous willingness to work together on issues in this committee. Catastrophic wildfires have significantly impacted her district in recent years, and I know she cares deeply about these issues. While I cannot support this amendment, I hope she can support the Fix Our Forests Act. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I yield back.
Mr. Chair,
Is there any further discussion?
may I be recognized?
Recognize the gentlelady from California.
I yield to Ms. Lager Fernandez.
Thank you so very much. I would like to point out that when the Chief Forester was here, he also pointed out that they did not have adequate resources in order to work on the issues presented to them. And I think that we have heard that over and over again in this committee. There are not adequate funding that is flowing to the Forest Service. There is inadequate funding flowing to the Bureau of Indian Affairs that would then flow to the tribes. And I would point out that my amendment does authorize. All it does is authorize. It doesn't spend. So our appropriators can figure out what spending has, where do we raise the resources? And I think it is short-sighted when we do not want to spend about $1 billion, $1.054 billion over 8 years for the Forest Service to manage land across our country. Let me tell you, when we first looked at the damages that would come about because of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire, it was about $8 billion for from one fire. $8 billion from one fire versus $1 billion over 8 years. That is short-sighted. We are actually costing the taxpayers more money when we don't respond, when we do not pay our firefighters what they need to keep them healthy and to keep them safe. We cannot be so short-sighted. And so the $1 billion authorized in this bill is a drop in the bucket compared to the cost of recovering after wildfires. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields,
I yield back.
and the gentlelady from California yields. Is there further discussion? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New Mexico, designated Leisure Fernandez, number 5. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Could we request a recorded
A
vote, please?
recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Ledger Fernandez number 5 will be postponed. I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Porter, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Porter number 1. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. I now recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As my colleagues have mentioned throughout this markup, this bill had the potential to be a unanimous consent bill with support from all members on this side of the dais. Unfortunately, this version of the Fix Our Forests Act contains areas of real ideological disagreement and therefore is something that I cannot support. Of those outstanding concerns, one issue is the provisions of this bill that significantly interfere with our federal judicial system and undermine the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and other vital legal protections provided to our constituents. While I appreciate the chairman removing the forced arbitration sections of this bill, the remaining language alters long-standing judicial review standards for the projects in this bill, which are broad in scope, lacking sufficient safeguards, guardrails, and use alternative arrangements that are typically reserved for acute emergency situations, which many of these projects are not. Because the projects authorized in this bill are awarded such lenient review processes, there is no guarantee that comment periods will be used, removing the first line of defense for our constituents, the public, to register their concerns. Then, by limiting injunctive relief and blocking access to judicial review, this bill effectively negates the second line of defense for communities affected by these large, fireshed-sized management authorities. Limiting judicial review is not the solution that my Republican counterparts are selling. Only 1 out of every 450 NEPA reviews are ever litigated. Further, this bill includes the infamous Cottonwood fix that we as a committee have marked up not once before, but twice, making this markup the 3rd time that we are debating whether to support the change. This language would place limits on thoughtful planning required of our federal land management agencies when new endangered species are discovered, critical habitat is listed, or new scientific information comes to light. Committee Democrats have consistently rejected this change. By including it in the Fix Our Forests Act, the chairman is showing that this bill is an attempt to pass harmful Republican priorities under the guise of something we all support, which is wildfire management. Consultation is just not the barrier that the Forest Service is facing in conducting thorough and well-planned land management projects. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences found that during a 7-year period, the median, the typical duration of consultation was 13 days. 13 days for informal consultation and 62 days for formal consultations. So I am offering an amendment to strike these 2 harmful sections from the Fix Our Forests Act in a hope that we can proceed to address wildfire management without undermining the public's and our constituents' legal rights. I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Levin, you're recognized for 5
Thank you,
minutes.
Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak in strong support of my friend, Congresswoman Porter's amendment. And in general, I want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, for wanting to work on this issue in good faith. I think it's critically important that we get to a reasonable bipartisan outcome here. You know, there's no question, even yesterday, we had a big wildfire in my district and I give incredible credit to our local firefighters for preventing what could have been a real catastrophe. We had forced evacuation of many homes in my district yesterday. I do think that Congresswoman Porter raises a really important point about judicial review and specifically my experience in my pre-congressional career is that provision like the one we're talking about could actually have the opposite of the intended effect, where if you have parties that feel that they are obligated to file suit just to protect their legal rights because they fear those rights are going to be taken away, it could just be really contrary to the intent of the section, which I think is to reduce litigation. You could actually see it increase what is being categorized as frivolous litigation. So I think that's a real concern. I will say, though, that I think we're having very good conversations at the staff level that I'm aware of, and I really hope that we can work through these differences and get to yes on this bill, because I think it's a really critically important effort for communities like mine and others across the country. So with that, I'll yield back and appreciate the hard work.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. And Mr. Levin, I appreciate your comments, and this is a very much a good faith effort for a bipartisan solution because these forests aren't going to fix themselves. We're going to have to take action if we want to see less of these devastating catastrophic wildfires in the future. And unfortunately, I've got to oppose the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. It would strike meaningful reforms necessary to stop frivolous legislation that blocks and delays forest management projects nationwide. The bill's provisions that Ms. Porter's amendment would strike were closely negotiated with our colleagues across the aisle, and they have bipartisan support. I believe we're up to 5 Democrat co-sponsors on the bill right now. A recent study found that approximately 90% of the details on environmental reviews are included to, quote, bulletproof the NEPA documents from frivolous lawsuits. This has placed a particularly heavy burden on the Forest Service, which has faced over 150 lawsuits in the past decade seeking to block forest management projects. And these are projects that would have removed millions and millions of tons of fuel from the forest. There are numerous instances of lawsuits causing significant delays to crucial projects aimed at preventing severe wildfire threats and safeguarding communities. A prime example can be seen in the case of the Bozeman Municipal Watershed Project. This project, which would address a wildfire risk threatening 80% of the city of Bozeman's water supply, was delayed by more than 15 years due to challenges by litigious environmental groups. I will say, have had a chance to visit Bozeman and see the work that's finally taking place there in their watershed. And it's just, it's common sense and makes you wonder why it was ever held up. The common sense reforms in this bill would limit injunctions in cases where a plaintiff is unlikely to succeed, balance the harms of action versus inaction with considering an injunction, and set reasonable time limits for injunctive relief. The legislation would also limit claims on fireshed management projects while providing a mechanism to address errors and deficiencies in project reviews on remand. Several of these reforms have already garnered bipartisan support in other legislative vehicles. Importantly, the Fix Our Forest Act also addresses the Cottonwood decision, one of the most common sources of litigation blocking forest management. Since 2016, there have been at least 35 Cottonwood-related lawsuits in 13 states, and 57 notices of intent to sue involving ESA new information claims. In March of last year, a bipartisan partial Cottonwood fix expired, leaving the dangerous precedent in place. It's critical that we stop the unnecessary, unworkable, and costly hurdles and empower activist litigants to block and delay management projects. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Bentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill, and in particular, this portion of the bill. In my practice, I've had occasion to speak with the Forest Service and the BLM numerous times in discussing the nature of the plans that they put together and in asking them why it takes 2 to 3 to 4 years to plan. And the answer, of course, is we're trying to plan to avoid lawsuits. And so the planning process builds on itself, and soon the plan is 3 or 4 or 5 inches thick. And as they're doing all of the planning to try to avoid the lawsuits, they're simply providing more fodder for the lawsuits. It's very sad. So what you've tried to do here, I think, is excellent in many respects. The setting forth the standards the court is to apply makes absolute sense, so that you don't have courts wandering around wondering what standard to apply. The establishment of proper points of focus by the court is excellent. All of this is designed to try to make these plans that we desperately need actually happen soon enough to make a difference before they burn up. And as I mentioned to the chair earlier today, there is a fire in my district right now. There's more than one, just like on almost everybody else from the Western United States' district. And so we do need to do something. I compliment the chair on putting together this thoughtful provision, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? There's no further discussion. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, designated Porter number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Porter number 1 will be postponed. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Hoyle 38. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am offering and urge my colleagues to support this amendment. My amendment includes reauthorization of 2 important bipartisan landscape health programs which have been developed and championed by my colleague, Representative Neguse. The Joint Chief Landscape Restoration Partnership Program supports the NRCS and Forest Service collaboration with agricultural producers, forest landowners, tribes, and public land managers to invest in conservation and restoration at a large scale. The Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program encourages a collaborative, science-based ecosystem restoration of priority forest landscapes. Supporting successful collaborative forest health programs is an important part of addressing the wildfire crisis. I want to thank the chairman and committee staff for working with me on this amendment. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate my colleague, Representative Hoyle, for offering this amendment. It adds 2 program reauthorizations from bills sponsored by our Federal Lands Subcommittee Ranking Member Joe Neguse. And the first of these, the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Program, is a vital initiative that allows coordination, something we talk a lot about, but we need to support it. It allows coordination between the Forest Service and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, to partner with local communities to implement forest management projects. The second is the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, which allows the Forest Service to partner with local communities and organizations to encourage collaborative, science-based ecosystem restoration across landscapes. These type of partnerships are vital for forest management, and both of these federal programs allow for various communities with ties to the forest to collaborate and coordinate on projects that ultimately preserve the health of our forests. Reauthorizing these programs would be a welcome effort to incorporate some democratic priorities into this bill. However, I do want to note these programs require funding in order to work. And that's why the standalone bills include language to update and increase the authorization of appropriations. When it comes to forest restoration and wildfire resilience, money does matter. And so while I support the addition of this initiative by way of the amendment, I also want to note that it does not address the underlying problems of the chair's bill, and we're going to need to keep working on the funding piece. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself for 5 minutes, and Ms. Hoyle, you've done a marvelous thing. You've brought Mr. Huffman and I together in agreement on your amendment, as I support your amendment as well, and I also appreciate you reaching out and working with us to include these provisions in the bill. This is good legislation, and I know you had other things you wanted to change as well, but we do have two components here that we agree on, as this amendment would reauthorize and make several improvements to the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Program and the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. The magnitude and severity of wildfire crisis will require us to work across jurisdictional boundaries on a landscape scale to achieve the type of paradigm shift that will ultimately restore health and resiliency to our nation's forests. This amendment helps achieve these objectives by reauthorizing and improving two successful programs used to increase cross-boundary forest management work, and I, too, would like to recognize the work that Representative Goose has done on these programs. The Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Program has enabled the Forest Service to collaborate with forest landowners, tribes, and other local stakeholders on forest management projects. Since 2014, the Forest Service has completed 134 projects across 42 states through this program. This amendment adds recovery from wildfire and the enhancement of soil, water, and related natural resources to the eligible activities under the Joint Chiefs Program. This will create additional opportunities to improve forest health. Representative Hoyle's amendment also reauthorizes and enhances the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, or CFLRP, which was created in 2009 to implement landscape-scale, collaborative, and community-based forest management. During the first 10 years of the program, CFLRP projects treated and restored 5.7 million acres of forest land, improved 1,000 miles of trails, and helped maintain 25,000 miles of roads. This amendment offers helpful improvements, such as requiring the development of a plan to provide support for collaborative processes. It will also encourage further utilization of innovative tools, such as Good Neighbor Authority, in CFLRP projects. I want to recognize Representative Hoyle for her willingness to work with us on this amendment. Again, we were fortunate enough last year to go to the Yale Forest together on a bipartisan educational tour, and I'm happy that we were able to extend that bipartisanship through the amendment process today. This amendment helps strengthen the underlying Fix Our Forest Act. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Oregon, designated Hoyle 38. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Hoyle 37. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm offering this amendment as a substitution, and I first want to say I appreciate the time that was spent in drafting this bill, and I recognize that my amendment is coming in late, and that I appreciate the part of this that was able to be offered, and I would just like to go through some of the things that I think are important, because I think the bill as written doesn't really have a path in the Senate, and given the danger that we have with wildfire, we urgently need to act in a bipartisan way with something that can actually be signed by the president. It won't be everything that everyone wants, but here are some ideas that I think are important. So the primary issues I see with the bill, first, this amendment would strike the 10,000-acre categorical exclusion for fire sheds because, as far as I understand, the Forest Service has not asked for that. And when I have spoken to them, they've said that they're working hard to find efficiencies and sometimes can't with a 3,000 acre categorical exclusion. There also have been proposals to just limit the acreage at something, could be 250,000 acres. I also think that that doesn't get to the heart of the problem, and where I don't generally like studies, I do think we need to study what the right policy is, what the right number is for these categorical exclusions. So that is why I proposed a report from the Forest Service with a list of instances in which they've used the current maximum CEs and an assessment on whether a larger CE would actually be of use, and if it is, then we move forward with that. My second amendment removes the Section 121 litigation reform. The major issue is with the requirements that plaintiffs can only have standing if they've submitted a public comment on the particular issue they're seeking to litigate. And that's not going to dissuade the professional litigators that I think this was meant to address. It just removes a tool for disadvantaged communities if there are unexpected harms from a Forest Service project. I also have concerns that the rest of this section would have negative consequences on the ground, and again, is not a solution to the wildfire crisis. I do not believe that this will get past the Democratic majority on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Happy to work with people going forward on something that could pass. My amendment also removes the broad 150-foot categorical exclusion for trees near utility lines. There are some very, very good legislation that is bipartisan from Representative Carbajal that addresses this issue, that makes it easier for trees to be removed from near where power lines are. Again, I know the Forest Service needs these tools. It's very important, but there are other ways to address it. In the House Farm Bill, there is language on this topic, again, widely supported on both sides of the aisle. Finally, my amendment does include 3 bipartisan proposals to help address the leading causes of the wildfire crisis, and that's the 2 landscape health programs that we just passed, thank you, we put forward. I am also proposing the committee to include the Civilian Conservation Center Enhancement Act, sponsored by Representative Andrea Salinas. This bill empowers civilian conservation centers like the one in my district to train additional young people for careers in wildland, fire and forestry, and rangeland management. It also makes it easier for the Forest Service to hire these CCC graduates after the program is complete. There are significant workforce challenges that limit the work that can be done on the forest. I'm committed to bipartisan action to address the wildfire crisis, and I know my amendment does not have the support to be adopted in this committee, but I hope to continue working with my colleagues on meaningful wildfire legislation that has a path to become law. And with that, I withdraw this amendment and I yield back, and I thank you for your time.
Without objection, the gentlelady withdraws her amendment. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated common law dove number 3. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Representative Comlinger-Dove can't be with us today, so I'm offering this amendment on her behalf. Our conversations today have focused on the general health of forests and how increasing active management by quote-unquote streamlining bedrock environmental laws is supposedly the way to address our growing wildfire threat. What's been missing from the conversations from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle is the fact that even beyond the way we're managing our forests, there is an elephant in the room. Climate change, independent of all other factors, is increasing the extent, severity, and risk of wildfires. Every month of 2024, in fact, has broken records for the hottest month on record. We've now experienced 1 full year, 12 months of record high temperatures. This amendment would add a findings section at the beginning of the chairman's bill that details exactly why climate change is a threat that we should be taking seriously when we're addressing the wildfire crisis. The amendment makes clear that the effects of high-severity fire exacerbated by climate change go beyond just what we can see on our public lands. It reaches further and increases risks to human health and property in the wildland-urban interface. Even the recent 2023 addendum to the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Strategy highlighted the need to address new and critical areas of emphasis in wildfire response. This includes climate change and human health and well-being. It also includes a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental justice. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has noted many times that without urgent, effective, and equitable mitigation and adaptive actions, climate change will continue to threaten our ecosystems, including by fostering more severe fire and weather that is conducive to triggering and sustaining wildfires. Unfortunately, the chairman's bill does not advance any real solutions to address climate change, nor does it provide the resources needed to protect our ecosystems from this ever-growing threat. Modeling done by the U.S. Forest Service in 2020 found that increases in total fire area are expected under future climate change conditions in every region of the United States. This will affect every member of this committee and their districts. Therefore, I urge the adoption of this amendment to underscore the significance of climate change as it relates to wildfire response and forest management. We must ensure that when we talk about this bill or any other forest bills moving forward, that climate change is not left out of the conversation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself, and I speak in opposition to this amendment. This amendment adds a findings section but does nothing to substantially improve the bill. And I would argue that if you're concerned with climate change, with carbon in the atmosphere, there's nothing we can do to better mitigate that than to manage our forest, because forests are the natural carbon solution. Forests naturally, on a very large scale and at a fairly rapid rate, pull carbon dioxide out of the air, store it in the tree, release oxygen and water back, and that carbon stays in the tree until a wildfire comes along and burns it up, and it immediately is released back into the atmosphere. It goes up as CO2. It also, if that tree gets killed by insects or disease and lays on the forest floor and rots, the carbon in the tree also goes back into the atmosphere through a respiration process of microbes eating the wood, but it's releasing methane, basically natural gas, CH4, back into the atmosphere, which can be more harmful than CO2. But the solution to both of those problems is to use active forest management. And as temperatures rise and as fire conditions become worse, we should be focusing even more on taking care of our forests so that we can provide real solutions, not just to make a statement. It's long been the bipartisan tradition of this committee to remove finding sections, not to add them during the markup process. I oppose the amendment because it is just talk and no action. If we want to take meaningful action on climate change, we should support the bipartisan comprehensive legislation being presented today in the Fix Our Forest Act. With that, I yield back and would ask if there's further discussion on the amendment. If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, designated Comlager Dove number 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Comlager Dove number 3 will be postponed. Recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for the purpose of offering his amendment designated Huffman 100, substitute A&S. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, the Fix Our Forest Act essentially dangles the threat of wildfire with buzzwords like restoration and resilience, really operating as convenient excuses to sidestep fundamental environmental laws that ensure public involvement and that ensure that consideration of the best available science. The introduced version of the bill incorporates minimal feedback from the Forest Service and the Department of Interior, and while I was grateful to see that it removed 2 highly problematic sections from the discussion draft, we're still left with a flawed and concerning bill. As I noted in my opening remarks, committee Democrats offered to collaborate with the majority to make this a suspension bill, and I think we could have gotten there. However, the chair insisted on including harmful language and rushing the bill through the committee process without considering many of our democratic priorities. Wildfires have become increasingly catastrophic due to climate change, rampant development also near wildlands, and decades of misguided federal management priorities. The evolving climate has transformed wildfires from seasonal challenges into year-round crises, with the affected areas in the western United States doubling over the past 3 decades, and that trend is projected to worsen. In California, 5,747 acres burned during the first 6 months of 2023, and so far in 2024, flames have already scorched through 89,000 acres. That's an increase of 1,400%. A wildfire in Northern California, in my colleague Doug LaMalfa's neighboring district, is still raging as authorities do their best to contain it. I recently had a major fire in Sonoma County, thankfully contained. If we want to genuinely protect our communities and environment from these devastating wildfires, we must prioritize people, ecosystems, and the economy. Our policies should focus on creating well-paying jobs, enhancing firefighter safety, and bolstering community resilience through actions like home hardening and defensible space. House Democrats secured significant investments in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act for these purposes. We empowered the Biden administration to integrate climate change considerations into federal land and wildlife and wildfire policies. This involves protecting resilient landscapes, fostering community collaboration, and enhancing federal workforce readiness for wildfire planning and response. And still, committee Republicans continue to argue that public participation and environmental review hinder active management. They conveniently ignore the many experts who point to agency capacity, unstable budgets, and outdated technology as the true sources of delays. I know I sound like a broken record sometimes in this committee, but rolling back the Endangered Species Act and NEPA is not the solution to the problems that we say we're concerned about here. There's a better way forward, and my substitute amendment champions responsible stewardship that protects our environment, wildlife, and public rights. It strikes the most contentious sections of H.R. 8790, such as those weakening NEPA and restricting judicial review. Unlike the majority's bill, which circumvents critical environmental reviews and public input, our substitute ensures forest management projects proceed responsibly with necessary safeguards intact. It protects wildlife and habitats by removing the controversial cottonwood provisions that undermine the Endangered Species Act, jeopardizing protections for newly listed species and critical habitat. And it prioritizes sound conservation practices over politically motivated rollbacks. Unlike the majority's bill, which seeks to limit access to judicial review and injunctive relief, our substitute upholds the public's right to challenge potentially harmful forest management decisions in court. Restricting access under the guise of reform is not the answer to improving federal land management. My amendment also focuses on providing federal agencies with the resources and support they need to make informed, science-based decisions. It integrates language that emphasizes the importance of funding critical projects and functions established by the bill to ensure effective implementation without compromising environmental integrity. In short, while the Fix Our Forest Act aims to expedite forest management through shortcuts and rollbacks, our Democratic substitute stands for responsible stewardship, environmental integrity, and the best available science. We must prioritize long-term sustainability and community resilience over rushed and short-sighted policies. With that, I urge support for this amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Rosendale, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for introducing the Fix Our Forest Act. As we're all aware, forest fires have recently ravaged our western states and will continue to do in the coming years. Our forests need active management, and this legislation is a step towards accomplishing this goal. We must also further empower states, localities, and tribes with a seat at the table to ensure they have a voice throughout the entire forest management process. Section 122 of this bill incorporates my Forest Information Reform Act, which addresses the disastrous Cottonwood decision. I'm sorry that I disagree with my good friend, Mr. Hoffman, in what the Cottonwood decision did or did not do. But the facts are very clear. The 2016 Cottonwood decision has created an intensely burdensome environmental analysis process causing serious delays for important infrastructure and resource management projects on federal lands. Section 122 would give forest managers the flexibility needed to carry out their work, improving forest health, habitat preservation, and recreational opportunities while addressing the issues caused by cottonwood. The Cottonwood decision increases risks to endangered species and their habitats in the United States, despite environmental groups' claims. As wildfires in the West continue to become more and more severe due to inadequate forest management, this fix will provide our local communities with peace of mind and tools to protect their lives and their assets. The U.S. Forest Service and the National Association of State Foresters have found that the cottonwood has not improved endangered species analysis or provided any tangible, let alone significant, conservation benefits. For example, in 2017, 2 climate organizations sued the Forest Service to stop a wildfire mitigation project in Montana, claiming the plan would harm the Canadian lynx. Despite the state and many other groups warning about the severe wildfire risks, the judge issued an injunction, and wildfire later destroyed the habitat conservationists aimed to protect. The halted project would have aided fire control efforts and saved the habitat. It's an issue we run into time and time again. Climate groups claiming they're protecting habitats or in the environment, but in the end, their plot results in more harm than good. States need every resource available to fight wildfires and protect citizens and the ecosystems. The Cottonwood decision has hindered several wildfire mitigation projects that could have lessened future fire severity. I continue to urge this committee to support this important Cottonwood fix and thank the chairman again for his continued strong support on this issue. And as such, request a no vote on Mr. Huffman's ANS and support of H.R. 8790, the Chairman Westerman's Fix Our Forest Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the Huffman ANS to the Fix Our Forest Act. The ANS strikes essential provisions from the bill, leaving our forests susceptible to wildfires and communities vulnerable to destruction. For several weeks, we have engaged with the minority on edits to this bipartisan bill. Both the introduced bill and the Tiffany ANS incorporate several changes suggested by the minority. We even delayed having this markup because we wanted to work more to come up with a bipartisan solution. The Fix Our Forest Act is a product of an open and inclusive process incorporating feedback from both sides of the aisle. In fact, 2 provisions from this ANS are the Hoyle 38 Amendment, which we approved on a voice vote and which I support. The remainder of Mr. Huffman's ANS reflects proposals without bipartisan agreement. The ANS removes all provisions that would streamline the implementation of forest management projects and prevent frivolous lawsuits. It removes language from the Forest Service to use existing categorical exclusions on areas up to 10,000 acres of land. The Tahoe CE, which has a 10,000 acre limit, has proven to be a huge success in the amendment sponsor's home state. Even the Chief of the Forest Service, Randy Moore, acknowledged the benefit of larger categorical exclusions when he appeared before the committee earlier this month. And I will add, just because the cap is 10,000 acres doesn't mean that it's always going to be a 10,000 acre project, but having that flexibility gives the Forest Service much more opportunity to do a more effective job by using the topography, the geography, and the science when they're figuring out the best way to attack forest management. It also, the ANS, removes provisions that would make utility rights-of-ways less fire-prone. Failing to manage these rights-of-ways has led to rolling blackouts, including in California, where millions of customers go without power so electric lines don't ignite catastrophic fires. And we know that many of these big fires recently have been ignited along transmission lines. And these are the areas we definitely need to focus on, not just transmission corridors, but also transportation corridors, the wildland-urban interface, and on our watersheds that are so critical to not only providing healthy forests, but also providing the water that's so critical, especially in the communities in the West. It's also telling that the ANS removes the word emergency from the bill. Millions of acres burn each year. This is a genuine emergency for the millions of Americans who must deal with catastrophic wildfires threatening their communities every year. We can't afford not to treat our wildfire crisis like the emergency it is. And I will remind the committee that one of the, quote, fire fixes that we did was to put wildfires under FEMA so that FEMA funds could be used to help pay for these devastating costs that are incurred every time these massive wildfires happen. The Huffman ANS removes provisions of the bill that the amendment sponsor has even supported in previous markups this Congress. The gentleman from California has previously offered amendments to the Save Our Sequoias Act, supporting the use of emergency authorities, a provision now struck in this ANS. We cannot accept the removal of crucial pieces of the bipartisan legislation. The provisions struck by this ANS are necessary to reduce the bureaucratic red tape and frivolous litigation that has routinely blocked and delayed forest management work nationwide. Again, I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Lamalfa, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We go through this committee after committee after committee hearing, and it's just frustrating because it always either is going to boil down to climate change or Republicans are trying to dodge the whole process. And what you find with the process is that the outside groups are taking advantage of weaponizing the process that we have these days. And so when we do things like categorical exclusions, this is what we're talking about. In order to streamline a process, to do a little bit more of the forest management, of forest harvest that is needed to make them fire safe. We all suffer it. Mr. Huffman does, I do, my other colleagues in California and the West. A 1 million acre Dixie fire in my district, the Camp Fire, and the Zog Fire, and the Carr Fire, one after another. And it comes down to the Forest Service is not managing their land quickly enough, and even those with private timber have a fairly difficult time getting the permits to do it because somebody wants to, or even post-fire. We didn't spend enough time studying enough the green-toed, yellow-eyed lizard of some sort after a fire. And so we can't salvage that timber anymore. We can't be timely in doing so. We lose value of the timber. Then what you have is a landscape where Forest Service lands are not managed at all, even post-fire. So it's so frustrating that the argument comes down to is that if we don't have these weaponized lawsuits that even after a 2-year review post-fire, someone comes in with some last-minute angle like, oh, better go back and do it over again. Then it's forget about it on timber salvage. So the real thing is we have to do harvest. We have to do things that are thinning the trees down to a manageable number of trees per acre that makes them more drought-proof, makes them more sustainable. And having 500, 700 trees per acre and such difficulty getting at the ability to harvest them, any smart forester these days knows that we're not going to clear-cut everything from here to Oregon. It's a managed situation, and the arguments are actually disingenuous. And you have extreme posters talking about Republicans as being team extreme and crap like that, only because we're trying to make it where we can keep our communities from burning and the beautiful asset we have out there from just burning down year after year after year. And I hope we can reach a point here where with maybe more forest tours or something, we would be able to look at and understand that a managed forest is not one that's so densely populated with trees that an owl can't even spread his wings and fly through the thing. And it doesn't save the owl to burn the forest down year after year after year, 6-digit acreages of fires. So I don't know. This isn't a prepared statement. This is just one that reflects the frustrations of me and my constituents year after year.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lamalfa, I think that green-toed, yellow-eyed lizard went extinct in the last fire because nobody's seen
It
one.
probably
in a-
did. It probably did.
Yeah, that's a joke. And also, I know that you do a lot of work on the forestry side of things in the Ag Committee, and this really is something we need to work together on, this committee, other committees, the House, and the Senate. And also, you may want to be nice to Mr. Huffman. I noticed he cast the deciding vote on your amendment in T&I earlier, so I noticed you're being nicer to him today. Now you yield back.
Yeah, we've had our go-rounds, but, yeah, I wanted to end with the idea that we made some good progress in the Farm Bill on a lot of positive forest provisions in there with categorical exclusions and work around power lines. Things like that are just basic common sense. We just need to keep advancing those. We need to increase the pace and scale, because when I asked Chief Moore, how many board feet are we growing each year of new timber versus how many board feet are we taking out? And they don't really have the numbers on that. We know we're falling farther and farther behind every year. Those trees, you can hear them growing out there, and we're not keeping up with the number of board feet. We'll keep losing that battle. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chair, I would just like to request unanimous consent to enter something in the record to the point of, scapegoating imaginary lizards and the NEPA process and other things instead of real solutions. I'd like to enter Forest Service testimony showing that on existing streamlining we've already done, that projects are proceeding at a clip of over 80% under existing categorical exclusions, suggesting that there's been some significant scapegoating of NEPA here.
Without objection?
Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, designated Huffman 100, substitute ANS. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted.
Request.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Huffman 100, substitute ANS will be postponed. I think we all heard the warning bell that votes are about to be called on the House floor. So we're going to take a recess. We'll reconvene at approximately 4:30 p.m. There should have been an announcement that went out to everybody's staff. Immediately following floor votes, we will come back and we will vote and wrap up our markup today. So the committee stands in recess. committee will come to order. The chair notes the presence of a quorum. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendments to H.R. 8790. Members will record their votes using the electronic voting system. The first question is on the substitute ANS to H.R. 8790 offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, designated Huffman 110 substitute ANS, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the votes.
It's weird how it's slow on the first one.
Has to wake up, I guess. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? The clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 14 and the nays are 19.
The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment to the ANS to H.R. 8790 offered by the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, designated Ledger Fernandez number 5, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 14 and the nays are 19.
The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment to the ANS to H.R. 8790 offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Porter, designated Porter number 1, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 14 and the nays are 19.
The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment to the ANS to H.R. 8790 offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Comlager Dove, designated Comlager Dove number 3, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will open the vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 14 and the nays are 19.
The amendment is not adopted. The question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany, designated Tiffany A&S. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 8790 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be favorably approved. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I give notice of my intention to file supplemental additional dissenting or minority views on the measure just considered. I ask unanimous consent that this notice be extended to all measures considered at the markup. Under House Rule 11, Clause 2L, this notice extends to all members.
Without objection, I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make any technical and conforming changes to the documents the committee just adopted, subject to the approval of the minority. Without objection, so ordered. If there's no further business, the committee stands adjourned.